So we're looking at Unit 52 on HND, which is Performance Project. And we're going to be looking at Learning Outcome 1 and Learning Outcome 2, having a little discussion about it. So, Learning Outcome 1 is the undertake relevant tasks associated with developing a performance project as directed. So what sort of tasks do you think are relevant to the sort of project you've been working on in the Alzheimer's project? What sort of things are the definite things you need to do?
I think research was like quite a big thing for it because a lot of us didn't know much about the subject.
Yeah, research.
Working as a team, like, because obviously we're collaborating with a year group that we haven't worked with before, so it's breaking the barrier and then working together and making sure we listen to each other and give each other time to create an idea and play around with it.
I think coming in kind of ready to, kind of going off what Chloe's saying, coming in ready to kind of listen to each other and work with each other and consider kind of everyone's thoughts within what's going on, and then also in general coming in ready for the typical kind of rehearsal standards, like kind of just coming in on time sort of thing, and in general just having that sort of mentality with it all.
Related to that, like taking direction as well, like I feel like all of us are quite similar. When we have an idea, we strongly need to get it out of our head to be able to work with it. So it's when somebody's in that moment, you need to just let them have it and let them direct you and just get on with it and like listening. And
so have you managed it with so many people in the group having lots of ideas?
Sometimes we sit down first and we'll talk about our ideas before we even sit around and play with them, and then we'll pick what we like out of it and try that. Other times we've been lucky enough that we haven't really clashed in terms of two people who haven't spoken at the same time. We've kind of been like, okay, you've got an idea, let's try it. We haven't really had the, like I said, the clash of two people.
Like mature kind of professional decision where we're workshopping everyone's ideas, and then also kind of coming to the agreement of almost combining two people's ideas together for a scene. So like thinking, oh, okay, your idea was good, let's implement that with also this idea, which kind of helped us create the final scene for a lot of things as well.
Creating ideas from each other's ideas.
So what do you think are the key sort of responsibilities you have as an individual rather than the group when you're working on a performance project?
Time management, definitely. Being able to not only get here obviously on time, but as well making sure that you're ready straight away, so you're tired, you need to make sure you're up, energized, ready straight away for the lesson, because we're not going to have that half an hour just chill and then do it. It's make sure you're here on time early enough to be able to prep yourself for the lesson, as well as going home, getting ready, like researching, like Charlie said. And
I think coming in a lot of the time, we were kind of going away from rehearsal thinking we're going to come back next time with an idea. So I think coming in with a creative eye in general, really, so you're ready to, create a scene before it even started to be workshopped.
I feel like that helps with research as well. It's independently going back home and researching further into, like at the beginning, just even the simplicity of researching what dementia is. Definitely I learned so much more than I knew. Like I had such a brief knowledge on it that after researching it, then we were able to come up with ideas of stuff that we already knew, like using other people's articles that we've been sent and emails. We were able to use that from our research to then put it in a piece, showing that we knew what we were talking about. It's like backed up knowledge.
Yeah.
So how do you get, say from that idea that you're given a thing like an email or how do you interpret that and turn it into performance? What do you do?
Well, we kind of workshopped the text that we were given, really, and we looked at it and kind of used a lot of the ideas that they gave us for what they wanted in the piece, but we kind of, in general, probably picked out certain things that were in the text, and we workshopped the specific, sort of like separation anxiety. We started off with separation anxiety as a whole, kind of really, and how that would work, and when kind of workshopping how that can affect like relationships between like someone with dementia and then someone like a carer, but then also then going into further detail and thinking about how we can almost us stray away from that idea, but then also stick to separation anxiety in general. So I think really,
It's usually the stimulus.
yeah, it's like picking out the text as like a stimulus and then using it as like a building block to create the piece in general, really.
I think as well, from reading one thing, there's a million different thoughts. We're not all going to think the same thing once we read something. Although it's a fact about what we're currently studying on our commission of dementia and Alzheimer's and stuff like that, we're not all going to have the same idea. So it's when we're all reading the same thing, we're able to talk about it together and say, right, did this, like for me, when I read the article we got sent by Mark, it then triggers an image in my head of either, right, we'll do, so he might have an example saying, this person called Harry does this, and suffers with this, and is living with this. So we would then create that character and think, right, how would this fit in along our storyline of, like Sam was saying, with the different things we've got, walking with a purpose, and the night, was it
Nighttime disorientation.
nighttime disorientation. It's trying to fit that character, the real person, into what we were showing, to make it really raw and make it really realistic, and to make sure that we were factual and that everything we did was like right.
And also looking at like our inspiration really in general. So we did a lot of background kind of research on what kind of not only kind of the text that we were given, which is the kind of original stimulus, but then implementing our own style as a company into it, by using kind of certain practitioners, and also we've put a lot of physical theatre into it, which is kind of just a style that we as a company kind of keep going back into. So we've kind of drawn from like companies like Frantic Assembly again, and looking at some work that they've done have helped us almost put the words from the stimulus into action by thinking, oh, okay, they've demonstrated something like this, maybe we can use this word and workshop it to their style, and then that's how we also kind of create scene and material.
I think also like deciding early on like the audience was going to be involved with it really shaped how certain things went.
In what ways do you think that? What
It's
difference
like-
did it make?
Sorry, where's it gone?
Does it make to the performance style having an audience in it?
It's like it changes it because there's like more interaction with the audience, so it sort of means we kind of have to go with the flow of it more than decide like this is exactly how this is going to happen.
Yeah, it's immersive for them, and having them in the audience, having the audience around the piece will make them feel that they're almost a part of it, so they're learning something at the same time as watching something, because they're getting hands-on experience on how that might happen in a real life situation.
As well, with using the audience, like Charlie said, it's challenging as well, because you never know how the audience is going to react. Like regardless whether you know the audience themselves, you don't know if they're going to do exactly what you want them to do. So it's making something that's so obvious of what we need them to do that it will hopefully go the way we want it to, but also having a backup plan if it doesn't go the way we want it to be able to improvise on the bits where it might go wrong. Where can we cover it up so it doesn't look like it's gone wrong? So that's the only risk of working with an audience. But I think from the amount of times we've gone through it and practice and things like that, we've pretty much covered every scenario that we could have in terms of it going wrong, with an audience's reaction to it.
I suppose really until you actually do it,
Yeah, we won't know until we
It's-
actually do it.
you can only prepare so much, can't
Yeah,
you?
exactly.
All right. So, what about this commission? Tell me a bit about that. What was the starting point? You know, what was the what were the needs that they gave you? What were the rules and outlines they gave you? And the parameters they put in place, you know, to contain you.
Well, they already kind of mapped out what they initially wanted in the piece in a kind of simple document, which had almost the original kind of points that they wanted us to cover, like nighttime disorientation and separation anxiety, actually became the titles for our scenes, really. So we kind of looked at it as they've kind of almost broken down scenes for us already, because it started off by just stuff they wanted us to include, but we thought let's have individual scenes for them, really. And
As well, there was scripts, there was lines in which they wanted us to say. Not all of it was scripted at all, it was just certain lines that they knew were actually used by people living with the illness that would help us with a stimulus to use those lines to think, right, let's create a scene from that.
So what's that called?
It's like key verbatim.
Yeah, verbatim. So using someone's real words in our scene to have an impact.
As well as that, like, they did point out certain language differences, like, whereas often walking with a purpose is called wandering, that implies that they're doing it without knowing what they're doing, whereas in the person who has dementia's mind, they know what they're doing, it's just they probably aren't really doing that. As well as the word suffering, it's also had to be removed, it's a person with dementia.
Yeah, it's living with dementia. That's something that we've learned as we've kind of come along from having them come in and watch our piece. We also kind of learned a lot, and it's been good to have feedback from the actual commissioners themselves whilst we're actually creating it, because we've learned whilst creating it that maybe we shouldn't be using that term, we should be using this term. So it's helped us as a company to make sure we're getting everything right before the final thing.
One other question based on that, the commission. So you say they've come in and they've given you feedback. So they're from different organisations, aren't they? The ones you've got the Alzheimer's, Alzheimer's Society, Dementia Alliance. He's from the carers sort of companies, isn't he?
That's some from the NHS.
And NHS as well. So you've had quite a group of people. But obviously they're going to all come at it from a slightly different viewpoints. And how much, how much is like a company, when somebody comes in from outside and tries to influence your work, how does that feel and what do you do with that?
I think as a college theatre group, we are set to time, we're working to a target, so we haven't got all the time in the world, we've got till December to create this piece to include as much as we can, to make it educational and to include everything that we've been told and things like that. I think because we've had so many different people come in, like you said, they've all had different ideas and different things of being like, oh, that's great, why don't you add this into it? And it's just like, some things we don't have, not that we don't have the time, but it's just adding it on, we kind of stray away from the thing that we wanted to. So it's taking the feedback, working on the feedback and kind of like sieving it, like filtering it to the bits that we need, and like, it's as well like what we're saying when we're having these meetings with people, it's learning things along the way. So we might say, oh, actually we've come up with this scene and it's a carer, but how would a carer differ from a relative carer? Like how professionally is it different? And then we're able to know that to then change our scene a little bit. It's just developing the scene further instead of completely changing a scene or completely adding a new scene. It's just adding the real facts to it and the actual things that happen.
So how did you find it with the fact they gave you quite a lot of information and they gave you kind of a length that they'd be interested in, and not the style though, not the style of it, you came up with it yourself. So how do you feel about the amount of stuff they've given you as the commission, the amount of, have you found that more useful?
I suppose it's, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, we actually ended up using what they got and then also using our own research that we've done about the subject as well. So we've almost come up with our own additional scene to what they've given us. So really, we've kind of done what they wanted and more. So it's kind of almost added on length to what they originally kind of wanted from us.
As well, it's like, it's easier to work on something when you've got too much information, when you've got enough information rather than too little. Like, even though, like Sam was saying, we had a lot of information from the people that we were given, we also did research ourselves, because it's having that certain things that we knew we'd be able to find off the internet, like off NHS website and things like that. And it's also finding other people's opinion. When we're using verbatim, there are things, articles and inserts from newspapers and things like that about dementia that we could use for verbatim in terms of people speaking about family members who might have it, or actual people who are living with it, that we can use. So it's doing that research ourselves.
Yeah, it's definitely helped by taking and picking apart. We've definitely picked apart the information they've given us, and we've almost used some aspects that they wanted in other scenes. So we've kind of, especially the separation anxiety scene, we've almost combined a lot of different effects of dementia into that scene with kind of separation anxiety being a whole for the scene, but also having other aspects in the scene that, which is still information that they've given us. We've just picked it apart and combined it together to make this one scene, which almost in a way has kind of ended up saving us time, because we've had to make decisions where we've had to think, okay, I don't think we're going to have enough time to make this a whole scene, so we can slot it into this one and come back to it. Yeah.
It's because we used we've got given, like we said, the 5 scenes. It's using that as the storyline, but it's kind of like that's the umbrella of it, but it's the bits in between that we're using those points they've given us, but it's the linking it and maybe putting that bit there and just making sure that we're factual and using everything that they've said to create a story maybe that is more clear. So I feel like each point that they've given us was a different story per one. And like in our thing, they are different stories, but again, we've umbrellaed it so we relate it from the beginning to the end. So it's just having that creative space to work with what we had, and just being able to develop it to something we wanted, like making it our own. So because we made it physical theatre, I feel like we were passionate about physical theatre, so we were able to do what we've been asked of, but making it our own.
I think it's interesting as well, just in my opinion, the information that 5 scene breakdown possibilities you were given is that the more you knew about the subjects, the more you kind of went away from it.
Yeah.
The more you knew, the less you felt tied for it. As the first couple of scenes, you did them, and then actually you broadened it out quite a bit, which they seem to have liked your independent thinking. They didn't feel you had to be tied to that original commission, did they? And that shows some development there as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think they liked that we came up with our own concepts of it as well, because it meant that they were coming in and they were coming in and seeing stuff that they wouldn't expect us to necessarily do, which has kind of exceeded their expectations really in general, which is good for the piece, because it means that it is going to be successful in teaching someone something new, but in our own kind of style of doing it, which has shocked, you know.
It's a definite confidence booster
Yeah.
to hear from the professional people who have worked in that area for years, and we've known it for a month now, and we're correctly educating people on a subject that we've known for a month.
And we're making sure that it's done properly, and that we're teaching people something, and that Alzheimer's Society and other organisations that are being a part of this commission can use it to educate people and get necessarily what they wanted in general out of the piece.
So do you think it's your responsibility to get it right, as in information?
I think
In a
at the
way,
end,
yes. Because like spreading misinformation about something is just as bad as not educating people about something.
I think as well though, it's not so much, it's not a massive pressure to be, you have to have everything correct, because otherwise they wouldn't have allowed us to have a creative range into it. And obviously knowing who we are and our what we're currently working on and things like that, we're not a professional company, we're not going to be able to get everything we can correct, but it's just to the best of our abilities getting it as correct as we can.
I think because with the original commission, I think what we were first originally given was quite simplistic, and it seemed like they wanted it to be more kind of just demonstrating what actually happened. We as a company kind of implemented all the kind of theatrical side of things ourselves, and we were kind of the ones to make the kind of we were kind of given the foundation of what the commission was, but we kind of expanded it to make it something that can not only kind of educate an audience, but also being kind of enjoyable for an audience in its own kind of way as well. Because
So, have you, within this, obviously you mentioned you meeting deadlines and you mentioned getting things done on time. Have you met any problems that you've had to solve, or has it been pretty clear running?
I think it's in terms of the audience amount, it's our piece we've kind of narrowed down to knowing how many audience members we're going to have, and remembering throughout creating new scenes how many audience members we've got, So when we, say in scene 3, had thinking about the audience that we have, creating this scene where they can see everything as long as they're a small audience, to then a scene later on, maybe scene 5, where we're like, we might need more people, but because we have to think about how many we had in scene 3, we're going to have to work with what we've got. So it's just, that was the only struggle we had really to, it's like the moving and the, like I said before, you're never going to know what an audience is going to do. So it's having to be so literal to be like, you need to be at this point here, I need you to do this, being as literal as you can so that they know to follow it. It's kind of like knowing the difference between direction and acting.
Yeah, and that's something we're going to have to just be prepared for when it actually comes to the actual performance dates, because at the end of the day, we're not going to know any kind of exact numbers of how much audience members we're going to get continuously coming in. So we've got to think about how we can split this up to make our performance work for them, and also think about how we need to be prepared to almost not change our piece, but adapt it to make sure that the audience are getting the most out of the piece and what we want them to get out of the piece. So by kind of what Chloe was saying about making sure they're directed in the right way possible, because a lot of the time our scenes are kind of heavily required on the audience being there so we can act for them and to them.
It is hard as well, because knowing as well what you would feel as an audience member when watching it, it is hard to know the difference between being spoken to directly and being directed than just being acted to. So I feel like there are some scenes where we're physically telling them to, like, well, we've cut this bit out, but there were some scenes where we were telling them, get out of the seat, we need you to move out of the seat. And that, for us, we were struggling with, because we were like, well, what if they don't? We need to think. And that kind of created a wall at the end of that idea, because we were like, if they don't, we can't think of an idea that's safe and successful enough to get them out of that seat quick enough for the next scene. So then we had to kind of like bubble around it and move around that idea, and still using that idea, but of getting them out of the seat in a different way.
Yeah, well that scene in general is the kind of a perfect example of something how we've had to change multiple times and rethink about how the audience may affect that scene. Kind of just a follow up from what Chloe said, really, but yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned that you've used physical theatre and you've been influenced by certain companies. Are there any other techniques that you've had to employ, any skills in particular that you've used that you think?
Definitely, our first scene was very heavily physical theatre based. We used Forensic Assembly when we were watching, we've watched many different videos of different lifts and ideas that we liked, and then it was just trying them out ourselves and using our knowledge of it prior to now.
And we've recycled techniques from kind of throughout kind of our time together as a company from like last year as well, and we've reused that and kind of passed it on to the new kind of group as well, and we've taken that inspiration also from obviously the company as well, but from our own skills as well and what we've learned as a company, and thought that this would work well for that scene. Like in the first scene where we're using a lot of physical theatre, especially with Kieran, and using the kind of fly kind of technique with him where we're lifting him up. That's definitely a technique that we're revisiting now, because it's something that we've used in the past, so it's kind of also, it's good to be able to use what we've learned and all of our knowledge to make this piece work.
Bye!